guys, and welcome back. On this week's show, part 2 of making a music stand. Well, if you watched part 1, you're probably pretty confused at this point in time. Because I really don't have any drawings or pictures of the actual product, or the actual project rather, it's kind of hard to picture what we're doing. But hopefully part 2 is going to pull all that together for you so that you'll understand just a little further. So I'm just going to head over to the bench. I'm going to bring you with me, and let's go over, like in a little sketch, exactly what it is that we're going to be making here. Well, I'll try to clear up any confusion that we may have had. Last week on the show, we did 2 laminations, and the first, or the shorter of the 2 laminations, is going to be at the bottom piece, and this is our lamination right here. And our second lamination was our 16-inch lamination, and that is going to be this piece here. We cut out our legs, and our legs, of course, will be right here like this, and here, sorry, and then another one, the third one, to make it so that we have this kind of configuration with the legs. They'll be 120 degrees apart. And then on the lathe, we're going to turn some decorative things here, whether it be a ball here and another little decorative part, who knows, we'll sort of play that by ear. And then this piece here will be something like this. And we have our 3/4 inch hole down through this lamination, and that is going to house our adjustable top for our music stand, which will be something like this. So that is our gist of it. There's more to the top part of the stand, but we're going to get into that a little later. But this is the general gist of the project that we're going to be making. Our legs are cut and sanded, and these 2 laminations are done. So the first thing that we're going to start with today is we're going to unclamp our laminations, and I'd like to start with the base piece right here. So why don't we go grab that? Well, here we have it, our base piece that we glued together. And the first step we're going to take in order to get this the way that we would like it is we're going to take it over to the table saw and clean this up. We're going to square off our ends. We're going to trim it down so that it's not a rectangle shape. I was just using the blocks I had, but we're going to trim it down so that it's a nice block, and it'll be, I would say, 3 inches by 3 inches in measurement. And once we get that trimmed up, we're going to mount it between centers on our lathe. And with our blank mounted between centers, we're pretty much ready to get started here. As far as the dimensions, this is a 3 inch by 3 inch blank. I know it looks rough, but we're actually turning it down to less than that. So we're going to start off with a 3 by 3. So 3 by 3, and I'm not even sure the length here. I think it's somewhere around 8.5 inches. Oh, 8.5, right on. That's how we're going to start with it. But first step will be to turn this thing to round. So with a roughing gouge, let's go ahead and do that. And guys, please don't forget to use a face shield when working on the lathe. Well, as you can see, we've got it turned to round, just roughly turned. Was that great big roughing gouge necessary? Hell no, but you know what? I've got it, and it does a great job, and it does a quick job of a blank this size. So I love it, and it may have been a little overkill, but you know what? It does a fantastic job, as I said. I just want to point out something to you guys that I pointed out in last week's show when paying attention to the way that your grain runs when doing this lamination. And I'm just going to slowly turn this here, and I want you guys to have a look and point out, if you can, where the glue joint is. And I don't know, I think you might be pretty hard pressed to find it. And the reason for that, of course, as I said, was that we paid attention to the way that the grain ran in this particular project. And by doing that, we have done, or we've effectively hidden our glue joint. And it's fantastic. I mean, it's very hard to find it in this particular piece because of the way the grain has been arranged. So our next step now is to pick which end of this blank we want to mount our legs to. And I think I'm going to go with the end that's up at the headstock here. Well, here we have one of our legs, and our legs are going to be dovetailed into this piece just like this. So we need to turn our shoulder kind of thing to hold or to house our legs. And we're going to mark in from the end here 3 inches, which is what this length is right here. We're going to mark in 3 inches, and I want to turn this to a dimension of, or a diameter of 2 7/8. Now, that's just a dimension that I've just sort of picked out of the air. It doesn't have to be 2 7/8. You can do 2 3/4, 2 1/2, whatever you like. This is your project. But I'm going to attempt to make this 2 7/8 in diameter, 3 inches up. And it's important to ensure that this is nice and flat and square to our bottom, because when we end up cutting our dovetails, we want the legs to sit in here square to the body of our music stand. So let's mark in 3 inches and then turn this down to 2 7/8 of an inch, nice and square, and then we're going to carry on. I don't know how well you can see that mark that's on there. I'm going to try to darken it up just a little. Hopefully you can see that on there. But the way I measured this is I didn't even bother using a measuring tape. I turned the lathe down to a very low speed, lined up my leg there, just gentle pressure against the blank, and then just mark the end of it with my pencil, just like that, to give us the mark. And there we have our shoulder that will accept the legs. And if you just place a square on the edge here, you should be able to rotate it all the way around and see that it is flat and square to the end of the music stand. And this one is, and I'm happy with that. So the only other thing really to check is just to make sure that we've turned it deep enough to hold our legs, and indeed that is good as well. So this section, other than a light sanding, is done, this 3-inch section. Now the rest here is personal preference. It's decorative. So I had mentioned in part 1 that I'd like to see a little bit of an overhang lip just above the legs to hide any imperfections in our dovetails. So we'll mark that. I'm not sure exactly how deep we want to have it, but I'm just going to guess. So there we go. There's a mark right there. I also said I'd probably like to have like a decorative ball on that or something. So I don't know. I guess it'll dip in here, and then the ball will start maybe right about there. And you can see how technical this is. I'm not even measuring. I'm just kind of eyeballing it, because I really have a little bit of a design in mind, but nothing earth-shattering. And I like a little bit of a ball, say right there. And other than that, I don't know, I guess we'll play around with this up here a little bit. Maybe just a couple lines there for some different accents. And I won't really know until I start turning it. But the first thing I'm going to start is we're going to start with this little lip here, just sort of curving this in, and then that will lead to an indentation and of course the ball that I spoke of. And if you want to plan yours a little more than what I'm doing with sketches and that sort of thing, please do. I'm just flying by the seat of my pants for the layout of the bottom of this, and let's just see how it goes. So I'm going to get my my spindle turning gouge, and I'm going to start working on this particular piece. Alright, so this is where we're at this point in time. We have the section turned to accept our legs with this nice decorative kind of a ball. And I don't know what I'm going to do here, but I'm kind of going to play this one by ear. I think I'll just play around, do some decorative little bits up here. And you can do the same. It's up to you. It's your project. And once I get that done, I'm going to give this a good sanding all over, and then we'll move on to marking our dovetails. Well, let me just show you what we ended up with on the final shape of this base piece. And you'll notice at the top of it, I've got that tenon that's turned there. That's a 3/4 inch tenon. I mentioned that in the first part of the series. And that is what is going to connect this piece to the next piece, which is that long 16-inch turning, almost like a turn into a vase shape sort of thing. But anyway, you can see it here. I think it looks great. It's all coming together. And I mentioned that I was going to mark the dovetails, but I think what I would rather do instead of that is finish the turning segment of this, and we're going to move ahead and turn the second section, or the top section of the base of this music stand. So let's get our other blank that we glued up, and we're going to do the exact same process. We're going to trim it down to a usable size and set it up between centers on the lathe. So I'll see you once I get it set up. Well, here we have our blank cut down and trimmed, 16 inches long, and we've trimmed it down to 3 by 3. Initially I made it 4 by 4, thinking it was going to be a little thicker than it was, and no, it's not. So 3 by 3, and here is our base piece, and this is on the assembly just going to fit together just like that. So now we have to figure out how it is that we're going to mount this on centers with our 3/4 holes in the middle. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn some 3/4 inch diameter plugs with a shoulder on them so that they will sit inside this 3/4 by 3/4 inch hole snugly. The shoulder will prevent them from going inside, and I can mount this on centers using those plugs in their place. Once the project itself is done, then of course I can pop it out and not worry about it. They don't have to be long plugs, maybe only about 1 inch deep, not even that. But either way, that's what we're going to do. We're going to turn some plugs, and you don't need a video of how to turn a 3/4 dowel with a shoulder on it. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to come back and show you how we're going to utilize those. Well, here we have one of our plugs, and you can see it's really nothing special. It's just a 3/4 dowel with a shoulder on the top to prevent it from being pushed into the center here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a little bit of CA glue, just a couple of drops just around the lip of this shoulder. We're going to insert this into our ends of our blank, and you can see now it's already set our center for us. We'll get one of those on each end, and we will set this up between centers on the lathe. Well, there's our blank mounted on centers, and I'm going to go ahead and turn this round. You guys don't need a video on how to do that, so I'll go ahead, turn it round, and when I get that done, I'll come back and see you, and we'll discuss exactly what kind of a shape we want this to be. Well, here we have the blank turned to round, and once again, due to the fact that we paid attention to the grain and the way that it runs, it's very difficult through this entire piece to see any kind of join or lamination anywhere in the piece, and that's what you want to try to accomplish. So now it's time to turn this shape, and I think I showed you before in the drawing earlier in the show how I want this piece to match. So choose which is going to be the top and which is going to be the bottom. I think this is going to be my bottom here, and we're going to want to turn this end to the same dimension so that it will mate with this piece, and then from there of course it will flare out and come back in. But for starters, let's measure this here, get that dimension, and then turn this end of our blank at the headstock to coincide with this particular measurement. Well, here we have the end, or the bottom end, turned down to the dimension so that it can mate with the other piece that we turned. And all we did was I just used a pair of calipers. I pinched it down onto the original piece that we turned, and then turned this end here until the measurement was the same. Now, we need to now taper this all the way down to the end. We kind of want a ball to be here in the middle, and we'll mark where we want that to end and start tapering in. We're also going to want a bit of a collar at the top end here, and that collar is going to house our pin that will be able to make our height adjustment usable. The important part to remember here is that 3/4 by 3/4 inch hole that's in the middle of this thing. Don't think that you can go down to 3/4 by 3/4 or a little bigger than that, because although the hole is 3/4 by 3/4, of course it is square, which means that corner to corner it's actually 1 1/8 of an inch, which means you cannot get any smaller than that. So this end here, the smaller end of our music stand, I'm going to turn this down to 1 3/4, possibly even 1 7/8, just to give us a little bit of extra play. And then once I get this end down to the dimension that I would like, then we're going to do our tapering from the bulk of our belly of our pedestal here down to mate up with this collar. Your design is your design. It's up to you how you want to do it, but I'm just going to get right into it here and start by turning this collar piece here that we need, and then I'll just go from there into the tapering aspect. I actually stopped turning the collar here because I've decided that I'd like to do this taper first. I'd like to get this taper proportionate to what I think looks good, and then once I get that taper done, maybe this collar could try to mate up with that. So I'm going to switch gears here a little bit and start working on this taper. I'm not going to go through a whole video of this. Good gosh, it'll bore you to tears. So I'm just going to start working on it and tapering this down until I get it to be a shape that I like. Well, you can see here that we've really got this whittled down. I've got a little bit of a uneven area right here that I don't really like. I'm going to clean that up. But we've got a nice taper. The thickest part of the body here is at about 2.5 inches, roughly. And we're just going to clean up this collar here. I'm going to make it a little bit smaller, not much. And then we're going to do a test fit on with our base. Well, here we have the top piece of our pedestal assembly, and we need to get these plugs out. And you should be able just to clamp these in a vise and give them a couple cracks with a 1-inch chisel just around the edge here, just to break that CA glue seal, and they should come right out of there. We'll see how this goes. I may not have it tight enough in the vise, but we'll give it a couple cracks and just see how we can separate this. Just like that. Did you guys see how easily that popped out of there? Just like that. A couple cracks with the chisel and it breaks that CA glue. Now you may need to give this a little bit of sanding, but let's do a test fit and see how this fits with our base section. Well, here's our base piece, and of course these pieces will be glued together, but you just line up your tenon that you cut and they'll just slide together like that, and I think they look just fine. I think that'll be great. Now I guess we'll knock this out of here and we can carry on by marking our dovetails for the base of this unit. The next thing that we need to do is mark out the dovetails. And we're going to start marking out the actual tails themselves. And those are going to be cut first. So the tails will be cut into the leg sections. But in order to mark them out properly, it's a little bit of a different process. So the first thing that we need is a template which will exactly duplicate the circumference of our base that we turned on the lathe. So let's start with that. Well, you could make this template, if you want to call it that, out of anything. You could make it out of cardboard, poster board. I'm going to use some 1/8 inch hardboard. And you really don't even need the full circle. You just need one of the arches. As long as you can mark it and hold it and get a good solid line drawn on the base of the music stand, that's all you really need. So I've traced around here. I'm going to take this over to the scroll saw, carefully cut this out, sand up to the lines, and then we'll move on with the next step to marking out our dovetails. So with our legs, we left 7/16 around the top shoulder here of our legs for our dovetails. And we're just going to put a mark at 7/16 all the way around each surface of each of our legs, and that way it'll give us a reference point to start cutting these dovetails in. Well, we have our leg positioned in the vise, and the first thing that we're going to do is mark a center line. Now, if you remember, these pieces were 1 1/8 thick, which makes the center line a line at 9/16. Once we get the center line marked, we're going to measure in 5/16 from each side and put a line at that mark. Just like that. And you can see those marks. Let me just show you. So those are the marks that we have. So now on the top section of our leg, I'm hoping that this is going to show on camera, it may or may not, we're going to transfer using a 1/6 dovetail, which is a 9-degree dovetail. I have a square a saddle square that draws the 9 degree, but I mean, you don't have to have one of these. We're going to draw our mark for our tail for this 9 degree dovetail, just like this. And once we get those drawn in, we're going to transfer our center line onto our top as well. Just like this. I'm a little off there. This is where our circle template now comes in. You want to put a little mark on your circle template. You can see it right there. Line that up with your center line right to the edge, and you want to transfer that mark onto the leg of your music stand. Let me just show you here what's going to happen. We'll just get this to focus in for me. You have this curved line here now for the shoulders of your dovetail. Well, the purpose of that is because we're not butting up to a flat surface like we normally would for a dovetail. It's the curved surface of this pedestal. So we need to cut those lines curved. Now you can cope them if you like and clean them up with a chisel, and I think that'll probably be my chosen method. But as far as the back, you just have to make sure that that back end is curved so that it lines up with our pedestal bottom. And that is, of course, the purpose that we made this little extension that overhangs. We did that so that if we're a little off on our dovetails, that's going to be hidden in there and you won't be able to see it. It's just a little sort of a trim piece. So once we get all of those cut on our legs, we will come back and cut the pins for our pedestal. And with that, that's about all the time we have for this week. We made some good progress today with getting both the lower section of that spindle turned and the top section turned as well. It's a lot of work, but it's really paying off the amount of time that we're putting into it. We have those dovetails marked, and when we return next week, we're going to start off by cutting out those dovetails, and we'll see how we make out with those. But for now, guys, that's all she wrote. I want to thank you for joining me, and I'm going to see you again next week with yet another woodworking video.